children who were born drug addicted, drug exposed, if they were placed in a household that was calm and stable and loving and nurturing, that generally by about the third grade, you couldn't tell the difference between the quote unquote crack baby and the child who lived in his or her biological home in a similar stable environment. And so really the child's trajectory turned on environment. That seemed to be the biggest thing.
Hello and welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast, where each week we talk about ideas for raising kids who become thriving adults. I'm your host, Audrey Monkey. I'm a summer camp director, writer, and speaker, and I've had the privilege of working with thousands of children, teenagers, young adult counselors, and parents over the past 3 decades. My husband, Steve, and I are raising 5 kids who currently range in age from 15 to 25. So my interest in raising kind, optimistic, self-reliant kids who become thriving adults is personal as well as professional. In episode 106, I'm chatting with Nefertiti Austin, author of Motherhood So White, a memoir of race, gender, and parenting in America. When Nefertiti, a single African-American woman, decided to adopt a Black boy out of the foster care system, she discovered that in America, mother equals white. Eager to finally join the motherhood ranks, Nefertiti was shocked when people started asking her why she wanted to adopt a, quote, crack baby, unquote, or said that she would never be able to raise a Black son on her own. She realized that American society saw motherhood through a white lens and that there would be no easy understanding or acceptance of the kind of family she hoped to build. Motherhood So White is the story of Nefertiti's fight to create the family she always knew she was meant to have, and the story of motherhood that all American families need now. In this unflinching account of her parenting journey, Nefertiti examines the history of adoption in the African American community, faces off against stereotypes of single Black motherhood, and confronts the reality of raising children of color in racially charged modern-day America. I am thrilled to have had the opportunity to read a pre-release version of Nefertiti's book and have this conversation with her, which was so enlightening and I learned a lot. I hope you enjoy our conversation for episode 106. Hi, Sunshine Parenting listeners. This week on the podcast, I'm really excited to have Nefertiti Austin, author of Motherhood So White, a memoir of race, gender, and parenting in America. Welcome, Nefertiti.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Nefertiti, why don't we start with you just telling a little bit about yourself, how old your kids are, where you're from, and then we'll get into talking about your book.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I'm from Los Angeles, California, and my children are 12 and a half and 6 and a half. I adopted them from the foster care system. My son was 6 months old about when we met, and my daughter was 10 months old. So we've been together for a really long time. And I was raised by my grandparents. So my parents were part of the Black Power movement, and eventually they got on drugs and their lives kind of fell apart, which meant our lives fell apart. And so in the early years, my brother and I went back and forth between my mom and my grandparents. And then eventually we stayed with my grandparents. And so in our house, my grandparents were wonderful and very supportive, but they were children of the Great Depression, didn't talk about a lot of things. So there was never a sit down conversation. Okay, you guys are here. You're going to be here, and that's just what it is. It was just assumed that we understood that, and it was assumed that we would just sort of keep going and not think anything of it. So for the most part, that's what we did. And in the comfort and the safety of being with them, I know I definitely felt a little different. So we're in this very middle-class neighborhood in LA, and it's a Black neighborhood, which was great. But I had friends who had names like Lisa and Lori, and then here I come with this Egyptian name, and I don't live with my parents, and I have a different last name for my grandparents, and there were questions, well, where's your mom, or where's your dad? And just having to either make up a story or come with an answer to explain adult decisions that were made on our behalf. And, obviously got over it and I excelled in school. But I think in the back of my mind, the whole idea of adoption was there. So my best friend's adopted. She grew up to become an adoption social worker. And I think when I became an adult and I was finally ready to become a mom, adoption was kind of a no-brainer. And I didn't really have language for how I felt until I was probably late 30s, where I felt like, oh, I was sort of adopted. So I kind of have a feeling, I have a sense of what it will feel like to be raised by people who didn't give birth to me. And so that was sort of the foundation for how I arrived at adopting. And I always wanted a family, wanted to be married and have children. But as I got older, what was really important to me was helping a child in need, just sort of paying it forward, because my grandparents did that for us and they didn't have to.
Yeah, that really resonated with me as I was reading your book, that you actually really can empathize and relate to like formally adopted children. You sort of referred to your situation. You were never formally adopted by your grandparents. Okay.
Right. I call that a Black adoption. Yeah. So Black adoption, like a Black divorce, no lawyers, no social workers, nothing like that. I recall that my grandparents were our legal guardians, but that was the extent of sort of the legal aspect of what happened. And so in communities of color, definitely in the Black community, that's very common. We take in nieces and nephews and cousins, and even people we're close friends with. It could be someone in your church or someone on your block. And it isn't necessarily a formal adoption, though everyone recognizes that those people who are raising you are your parents.
So it also seems like because of your experience, you sort of understand that adopted kids really need a lot of talking to and explaining about their situation. And I'm sure with your best friend, the social worker, she also helped you with that.
Absolutely.
What are some of the things that you either wish people had talked to you about, or that you have, because of what you know, shared with your own kids about adoption?
Well, as a kid, it would have been nice to have had just a little more information about what was going on. We didn't need to know the details. That wasn't our business. We were kids. But so in my own case, when I became a mom, I made a point to talk about adoption with my kids when they were very young. So like around 2, I started using the word adoption and reading. I have a couple of books that I like that I read to them. And I just really normalized it for them so that they knew that as their skin is brown, they are adopted, and that's just it. But I also have spoken with them and continue to speak with them age appropriately about how they came to be with me. And I make a point to let them know that I'm so happy that they chose me and I love them, and this is just the best place for all of us. And naturally, if their parents could have made different choices, they certainly would have. And I do not talk bad about their parents. And my grandparents didn't talk bad about my parents either. And that was great. That was definitely a good thing.
So interestingly, do you ever just share sort of that you have a little bit of similarity with them in your own background?
Oh, absolutely. As I've gotten older, I have said, and they've asked, well, so is Grandma Ann, is that your mom? So as they began to understand, oh, there's a mother, there's a grandmother, like layers to a family. And so then they would ask. My son in particular, because my grandmother passed a couple of years ago, my daughter was like 4. But he, of course, had a relationship with her. So he would ask. And so even though she isn't with us, I do say, well, Grandma Ann and Grandpa Henry, they took care of us, and I'm taking care of you. And your parents are the people who provide a home for you and feed you and love you and help you with your homework and help you just kind of get on in the world.
So one of the things that I really struck me in your book is just, first of all, how hard you worked and how successful you've been in, your education, in your writing, in giving back by teaching parenting education classes. What do you think were some of the reasons or some of the things that your grandparents did when raising you that helped you become such a resilient and successful adult? What are some of the strategies that you feel like they used?
I think that they were pretty supportive of us. I always loved school, and I loved to read. So I read very early on. And so my grandfather was a big reader, and he was always on his typewriter. And my dad also wrote, so I was kind of surrounded by books and words. And without him ever saying anything, I think I picked up quite a bit of that from him. And because I was definitely a self-starter, didn't need a lot of support when it came to, okay, you got to go to school, you have to do your homework, that sort of thing. They didn't blink when I would join another club, and then I would join yet another club. And then I would ask, well, can I go on this trip? And can I go on that trip? And generally the answer was yes. So I think that was probably the biggest thing that they did. And so I use that same thing. I try to see what my kids are interested in and give them an out. So that when my son retired from baseball at the ripe age of 11, I was okay with it. I was a little surprised, but I said, okay, if we're done, we're done. And what else are you interested in? So I tried to kind of leave the door open so that they could kind of drive their interest. And then my grandparents were also very conservative. And so it was doctor, teacher, lawyer. And in my own way, I tried to conform, but then I rebelled against it. So the opposite of what they did is what I do, which is I'm open to having children who may pursue the arts. I think it's great. I didn't necessarily get that green light, but I'll give it to them.
Well, did your grandparents eventually, they got to see your novels, right?
Yes. Oh my God. My grandfather was so happy and so proud, but yeah. They were not pleased about law school, but they were happy when the books came out, that's for sure. But my grandmother would slide me money. Like, I'm self-taught. And then after my books came out, I thought I should probably go to a writing class. And so I had no idea how to do all of that. And I found poets and writers and, these things cost money. So she would kind of slide me money so that I could attend these things. So, yeah.
That's really great. That's a great example. So you had actually really great parenting, despite, biological parents not being able to pull through, which I think, is one of the reasons I know many people choose adoption, is just to give some kids that opportunity, just to have a loving family that all children deserve. So tell a little bit about your adoption journey and specifically how you decided that this book was something you really needed to write.
Okay. So in 2006, I finally felt like I'm going to do something different. And I had traveled all over and moved all over and had every job you could think of. And I was ready to be a mom. And so I knew it was going to be through adoption. So I called my best friend, I called Laura, and I said, hey, I'm ready. And so the process is the process. I had to go through an orientation. I had to take parent ed classes. And that part of it was relatively easy. It's an intrusive process because I had to get letters. Well, I had to get letters of rec from my friends. I had to pass a national background check, state background check. I had to be fingerprinted. I had to get a pediatric CPR certification. And the psych eval, the home study, that was twofold. And so they wanted to know, well, what's your relationship like with your family? What's your relationship like with your siblings? So I had to be very vulnerable and very honest about my childhood and even my adulthood and even dating. I wasn't dating anyone seriously at the time. And, if I were, how would that play into, would that change my mind about adopting? And I was very clear it would not. And so I had done that part of it. That was sort of the easier part, though it took a long time. And I love the library. And so I do what I always do because I love information. And I go online and I'm looking for books about Black mothers who have adopted, single Black women specifically who have adopted. And when I came up with nothing, I thought, okay, maybe I need to go in the library and speak with the librarian directly. And I went on, the internet and other places, and I couldn't find anything. And what I discovered was that our stories were deemed marginal. So I could find anecdotal information, woman here, woman there. And there were blogs, definitely. But I could not put my hands on a book and curl up in my bed and read someone's journey to adoption, to motherhood. And that was what I was looking for. And I thought I was writing a collection of essays on race and gender and adoption. And naming a child, you get a child from foster care, you adopted a child, and your child may or may not have come with a name. And do I change his name? Do I not change his name? How do I respect his culture, but also bring him into my world? And when I didn't see anything, I thought, okay, I'm going to have to do something about this instead of just rant and complain about it. And so I had an agent and we worked on some things and it didn't really go anywhere. And then I got a new agent. But before I got my wonderful agent, Kate McKeon, I got rejected like almost 60 times by agents who said, oh, wow, this is great. And you're a great writer and this is important, but it's marginal and no one's going to buy it. And I can't sell it because, of course, at the end of the day, publishing is a business. And that's offensive, naturally, to tell someone that their real life existence is marginal. And so Kate saw things differently, of course. And so my book really is the book I wish I had had. And I'm not speaking for every single Black woman in the country, not at all, because we all have different experiences. But culturally, we have a lot of similarities. And I just really wanted to know, how did you tell your middle-class conservative family that you were going to adopt from the county, whichever county you lived in? How did you deal with family members or friends who said, well, those kids, those are crack babies, are you going to take care of those kids? How did you deal with men? My guy friends would say stuff like, well, you can't raise a Black man in America. So I was looking for words, for information, for context to be able to share with people. And when it wasn't there, I had to create it for myself.
Well, I actually really learned a lot. So first of all, I want you to talk to that kind of misnomer of crack babies.
Yes.
Because I did learn from you about that. So why don't you explain just kind of, what it does and doesn't, why that's not a good name, first of all, and all that.
Right. So first, there's no such thing as a crack baby. But when the crack epidemic hit in the 80s and 90s, there were children who were born drug exposed and drug addicted. And it just seemed like the gut reaction was that these children are going to never thrive. They are going to grow up and be miscreants, and they'll be the ones in the parking lot begging or trying to jack you for your purse or something like that. And then later on, as more studies were done, it was discovered that children who were born drug addicted, drug exposed, if they were placed in a household that was calm and stable and loving and nurturing, that generally by about the third grade, you couldn't tell the difference between the quote unquote crack baby and the child who lived in his or her biological home in a similar stable environment. And so really, the child's trajectory turned on environment. That seemed to be the biggest thing that was going to either help a child thrive or not. And so when you take a look at those families where drugs or violence or neglect play a very central role in the child's life, again, if you remove those barriers and you put them in stable, loving households, it is 180 degrees from what they first thought. So it's an old term. You don't really hear crack baby too much anymore, but in '06, people were still saying it.
Hi, Sunshine Parenting listeners. I'd like to share a recent Amazon review of my new book, Happy Campers, 9 Summer Camp Secrets for Raising Kids Who Become Thriving Adults. It comes from Melissa, and she says, best self-help book ever. I am not generally a fan of self-help books, but this one is so much more. I love camp, and I want to parent my kids better. This book is a practical look at what makes camp special and how we can translate camp magic to our home life. I honestly can't put this book down and have gleaned so many insights and takeaways. Some I'm already implementing in my own family. Thank you, Audrey, for sharing your decades of camp knowledge and resources to the public. For more information about Happy Campers, visit happycampersbook.com. Are you still involved with parent education for parents who are planning to adopt? I know you did that for a while. Are you able to help parents kind of understand that, it's not as scary as they might think, adopting a child who might be born addicted just because of that reason, that their environment can really help them so much?
Right. Well, not to the same degree. Those classes are typically in the evenings or on weekends, and I'm usually at the baseball field or this, track or something. So Actually, in a week or so, I will speak to a group of prospective foster and adoptive families. And so I'll touch on that a little bit, but that is part of the curriculum and it's covered, which is where I learned that. And it was gratifying to hear that as well.
I'm wondering, because when I went through the adoption process, there is a lot of just kind of general adoption literature, but is there much for single parents in general at, whether Black or anything else? Is there a lot of literature or not so much?
There's some, not a whole lot. Generally in sort of like the bigger books on how to adopt, or you're thinking about adopting, these are things you should know. Often single parents are thrown a bone, or a chapter here, something like that. And there are probably a few books on single parenting. And then once again, adoption is sandwiched in there. But I'm not so sure that there are any books that are specific about single parent adoption. Maybe, I'm not sure though.
So one of the things that I think you share very nicely in your book is you talk about that concept of Black men saying, oh, you can't raise a Black boy, but you really had a plan and kind of a process in place to have this community that's going to support your family, so that you had, role models of men and, aunts and uncles and miscellaneous people. Talk a little bit about that, how you decided just kind of how you were going to set this up with your kids so that it wasn't you're the mom, but you have this support network. So why don't you talk about your support network and how that's worked for you?
Okay. I knew, because I was very clear I wanted a little boy, I knew that I would have to create a male community for him. And that any woman who is going to have a child of the opposite sex, whether you give birth or not, that child needs his or her community. And there are things that I cannot teach him. There are things that he will receive from a man that he will just ignore me because I'm mom, or he'll feel like, okay, yeah, whatever. So we started, and he's got a godfather, and my coworkers at the time, they were so much fun because they were a lot younger than me. And so they were like older brothers to him. And so they were so much fun. And as he got a little older, sports is really where his male community just kind of exploded. And a lot of his teammates' dads were the coaches, which meant that the kids were together like 5 days a week, sometimes even more. And so that made it really nice because these men were great. They just gravitated to him and they allowed him to be part of their family and still continue to treat him like he is one of their kids. And I really appreciated that. I didn't even have to ask. A couple of the men were raised by single moms, and so they got it, immediately. And one friend in particular said that his neighbor, I think, had like 2 brothers, and if they would go places, like he would get to go with them at times. And so he's like, so, anything you need, let me know. And so that was cool because I did try, I'm figuring I'm mom and this was my decision. So I'm responsible for every single aspect. And I write in my book about trying to teach him to pee standing up, which was ridiculous. And the one and only time I took the clippers out and tried to cut his hair. And women, he currently has a woman barber, so I'm not saying women can't cut hair. However, the whole barbershop, like that's a whole community and a world in and of itself. And so, and once my daughter came along, these same men took her in as well, because girls need a male community as well. Same thing. There are things that they can say to her that she just beams and she'll, yes, Uncle so-and-so. But of course, if I ask her to do it, and she doesn't want to be bothered with me. So community is so important. Whatever the people look like, however you can get it. It's huge. I
think it's wonderful how intentional you've been. What have been your favorite things about being a mom?
Ooh, that is a good question. I think really watching them thrive has been wonderful to really see that even though I thought certain things when they were little, you never know how it's going to play out. And so it's wonderful to watch their personalities develop. So my daughter, for instance, she is fire. I love her. She has her own opinion. She's super independent. And she is a girly girl, but then she's a pit bull and she loves to dance. And so just sort of watching her be so comfortable in her own skin And with my son, he and I are similar in terms of we're kind of reserved if we don't necessarily know people. And then after a while, we warm up. But he reminds me so much of my grandfather because he loves to read. He's very much an intellectual. And so I almost feel like I have pieces of my grandparents, of my parents with me, with the kids. So I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Oh my gosh, it does. And I'm glad you mentioned the reading because that was going to be the next thing that I asked because, that's one of those things like you talked earlier about how important the environment is and how you were positively influenced by your grandfather loving to read and you really kind of absorbed that. So isn't that great that your son has learned that from you? I think reading to kids and having them develop a love of reading is just so important because it opens up the world to them. Whatever they decide to be interested in, they can then go out and find it. And I've heard a lot of great stories of people who, even from poverty, who took their kids to the library. And that made all the difference in them, getting ahead in school, going to college, all of that. So I love that you're continuing that reading tradition in your family.
I had no choice living with me. Everyone's a reader.
That's so awesome. I feel the same way. So at my summer camp right now, the kids don't have any electronics with them. And we have a camp library and we have one of those, how sometimes they have those little libraries around town where you can donate books. And we have like a bigger camp library in the office, but then we have this one that if kids finish a book, they can leave it. And then we have some in there. And kids can actually sign up if they want to, instead of doing like an active activity in the evening during free time, they can sign up to read. And we have a little campfire and they're sitting in these comfy chairs. And just last night I walked by and there's like 12 kids sitting around reading. And I'm just like, my heart.
Oh, that is so sweet. I love that.
That's one of my life's missions. My kids all love to read, or at least my daughters do. My sons are not as excited, but I'm hoping they will come around. My older one read through the Harry Potter series. That really got him. And then my younger one, I feel like he'll come around because he used to be a reader. And I think he's gotten caught up in high school and, kind of reading for school, that I'm hoping that'll come back to him. So Nefertiti, I think your book is not just for Black mothers, to be honest, because I'm not a Black mother and I learned from you. I think it's a good book to just shed some light on kind of things and presumptions that people might have. I bet you've read Bryan Stevenson's Just Mercy. Are you familiar with that book?
You know what? I am familiar with it. I haven't had a chance to read it yet. I hear it's really, really great and also heartbreaking.
It is. Also, I really feel like Angie Thomas's, both of her books I have just really enjoyed reading them because it has helped me feel like I can understand a little bit better, things that I would have not thought about. And so I really appreciate that you wrote this book because I think it's not only going to be helpful for the people who are in your same circumstances, Black mothers adopting as single, women, but also I think just in general in the adoption community. What are your thoughts on, I know this is kind of a controversial topic, but transracial adoption, white families adopting Black children? Do you have any advice for them or suggestions? Because I actually know there's one family, actually a longtime camp family, who when they were adopting, social workers in their area said, the children who need homes are not white. Are you okay with that? And they were like, sure. They would live on this ranch and have a camp. And so they have this very mixed family. They have, I believe, a Hispanic daughter and 3 Black children who are now all adults. So I'm just wondering, I know it's different from your experience, but do you have any advice or input, or are you trying to encourage more Black single moms to adopt Black children, or do you kind of open to whatever family is available to provide that environment?
I'm kind of all of the above. So I think if a child can go to a loving home, stable home, a home where the parents have really thought about what that's going to mean, then they should go there. And the thing that I've noticed about transracial adoption, just reading articles where some of the parents have written how they were surprised about this or surprised about that, is it just makes me wonder if people are doing their homework. And the most important thing is you have to do your homework. So if you're going to adopt a child who is Latinx or Black or Asian or whatever the case may be, their culture is everything to them. And you have to get yourself up to speed on their culture. And not just from afar. Like, you've got to make friends. You need Black parent friends or Latinx parent friends, because your white privilege is not going to protect them when you're not around. Did you see what happened to the mom, to the boy in Utah a couple of weeks ago? White woman, she adopted, her son is Black. I'm not sure if the daughter is Black as well, but in any event, they go to Utah to visit her mom, all white town, and her son is 10, and she looks out the window and the police have her son on the ground in handcuffs, and he's asking the officer, what did I do? And he's telling him to shut up, and the mother is yelling out the window to let him go, get off of him. The officer gets up and says, well, he looked like a suspect. She's like, he's 10. And so the officer leaves, he removes the handcuffs and he leaves, and he comes back later and he apologizes. So first of all, not very many Black women get an apology from the police, number one. And number two, she was horrified and she felt like, it was just because of his race. It was just because he's Black in a white town.
And she was a white mother or a Black mother in this situation?
White mother.
White mother. So she experienced.
Yes, what Black mothers.
Okay. Wow.
Yes. And so it was horrible and terrible what happened to her. But for us, it's horrible and it's terrible. And it's not that we wish that on our kids, but when it happens, we're not as surprised. And so I think that that's the biggest thing in the whole transracial adoption. I don't want to call it a movement, but that white parents really need to remember is that that is a Black child wherever they go in the world, or whatever color or race or ethnicity they are. And you have got to arm them with information so that they can walk away from a situation. And her son had special needs, and you can look at him and tell that he had some learning differences. And the officer thought he was older, but he looks like a little boy.
That's tragic, but it seems like there's been, unfortunately, so many of those stories in recent years that are just heartbreaking. That, it's funny because you see boys go from like little boys to kind of looking like men, even when they could be 13 and they're still boys, but there's like this year, usually between 8th grade or around then something. And we see this at camp where kids one year are like little boys. And then the next year they're taller and their faces are thinner. And they're like, oh my gosh, you've kind of turned into a little junior man, but you only look like it on the outside. On the inside, you're still a kid. So, wow. And it's heartbreaking that you have to talk to your children when they are Black boys, especially. You have to have really tough conversations. So now your son's 12. Have you already had some of these conversations with him about, how to comport himself, and how, unfortunately, he probably has to sort of be at like a higher standard of behavior because he might have, like that officer in Utah, somebody who is not going to give him the benefit of the doubt and look at him and see him as a child.
Right. Yes. We've had many conversations. We have them regularly, and we've had them since he was in kindergarten. And it is heartbreaking to have to steal your child's innocence, to take little pieces of it, every few months or every year. But it's essential, and it's just, we want to keep him safe. We want to keep all children safe, naturally. But definitely, if we're in the store and he wants to go down the toy aisle by himself, sure. What's the rule? I know. Don't touch anything. Don't touch anything. Well, why can't I touch anything? And so now I'm having that conversation with my daughter. Okay, well, you can look with your eyes. And you may not touch. Well, why? Well, I don't want the people who work here to assume that you have stolen it or you are going to steal whatever the item is. We don't want that type of attention. And because he's getting older and he wants to scooter through the neighborhood, ride his bike through the neighborhood, I certainly did. And I'm okay with it. But as he's leaving out the door, okay, if you're stopped by the sheriff, what do you say? Yes, sir. No, sir. If there's any issue, I will handle it. I just need you to come home. And that's awful to tell a child that.
Do you feel at all that like the bias education is moving the needle at all? I mean, I have seen more about studies of like people like police and different people in authorities doing like some computer simulations to help identify biases that they might not even be aware of? Do you feel like the needle's moving at all?
I think so. I can give you an example. At my kids' school, definitely we've got a pretty large population of children of color. That doesn't mean they're Black, they are of color, a lot of mixed race children. And they have really, really come a long way with creating affinity groups. And we have what's our program called? It's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Group that all of the parents are just automatically a member of. And we have meetings and we have speakers who come in. But I think, honestly, the best way to move the needle is through interpersonal relations, because you can read anything, but you have an emotional distance from it. It doesn't impact you. And it's hard to see your own bias. It's hard to see your own privilege. And I think it would really require people to sit down with one another and just listen to stories about a friend of mine whose son, just on his own, said they live in a well-to-do neighborhood and not a lot of Black families live there. And on his way from the store, he carries his receipt in his hand. And no one told him to do that. But somewhere along the way, he understood that I need to carry my receipt in my hand so that no one thinks that I have stolen this item. And so I think it's those, and they're not anecdotes, this is real and regular things, if we can have just more interpersonal conversation and just the after effect. So you have this child down on the ground, you've arrested him, and he came back and he said, sorry, but what about the next day? What about this child who's having nightmares? I'm not saying that situation, but I'd have nightmares.
Yeah, that's a total PTSD kind of thing, I would say, for sure. If you were like thrown on the ground and, oh my gosh, that would be horrible. That's horrible to a 10-year-old child with learning disabilities. That's just so heartbreaking.
Absolutely. Oh, but if the mom could speak directly to other people about it, as opposed to it being, oh, that happened over there, I think that would really move the needle.
Yeah, that's so great. Well, are there any other messages in the book that are really important to you that you'd like to share that just to encourage people to pick up a copy?
Well, I think, as you mentioned, and I appreciate it, that my book isn't specifically for Black women, for Black mothers. There really is something for everyone. And for white moms, it's important that I just think mothers come together, period, because there is a racial hierarchy in motherhood, and that needs to go away. Because if we're going to raise children in our particular climate, then we need to come together and we need to be able to speak to each other about ways we can support not only each other, but support our kids. That's crucial. I think moms have a lot of power, and our voices collectively could make a huge difference in like quality childcare or paternity leave, maternity leave, family leave, health insurance, all of those things that come up. So many kids have ADHD and sensory issues and all of these things that affect all of our children. And if we could come together and really support each other, I think we could make a huge difference just in how we treat each other. And the kids would feel a lot better about themselves and who they're friends with, and maybe be sort of less suspicious of the other.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do see that. I mean, among especially like the college students who work at my camp, they are, just kind of every different race and background, and they even age too. And I see that there are communities, and it sounds like your school is also one. There are places that exist that are kind of an example of how people can live and be together and be friends. And I do agree that you can't other people you are friends with.
Exactly. And I think it's also important to respect our cultural differences, because there are differences, and that's okay.
But asking about it instead of just wondering, I always feel like it's better to be, when you have a friend, just asking them, oh, is this okay? Do you guys do this in your family? Or, if you're having a friend over or something like that, you can always ask that. Well, I'm so excited for your book, Nefertiti, and I'm so thankful that I had the opportunity to read this advanced copy and just get to know you. And I hope many others get to read your book and your story, which is you were very vulnerable in it. You shared a lot about your own childhood and even your path to determining what you wanted to do with your life, which I think is common to a lot of people in that you have on the one hand, this feeling that you want to make your parents proud. And then on the other hand, trying to figure out what's your own compass. And I love how you wrote about even your story about how you became a writer. That was really, as someone who I'm a late blooming writer, I had other jobs first and then I started my blog. And I realized now looking back, it was something that I always wrote journals as a kid, but I kind of circled back to it, sort of like how you started law school and circled back to writing. So I could relate to that path that I think most people have, which is not a straight trajectory from what you want to think you want to do and how you get there,
Exactly. Well, there's more than one way to skin a cat, and I've always believed that, and that is probably one of my many mottos. So thank you for having me on, and I'm glad that you enjoyed my book. And it was hard being vulnerable. I did really struggle with what to share, and it's one thing for people who don't know me to learn things about me, but it's going to be a whole different ballgame for people I've known for years, and I'll say, I didn't know that.
I know, I agree. Nefertiti, where can people find you? Do you have a website or an author blog or something? Or where?
I have a website. It's nefertitiaustin.com.
Okay.
And I'm also on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook.
Okay, well, I will put links to everything in the show notes for this episode.
Okay.
So people can find you and learn more about you and your other books and everything else. But thank you so much for being on. This has been really fun talking to you and getting to know you a little bit better today.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for joining me and Nefertiti for this episode of the Sunshine Parenting Podcast. You can find notes and links to things that we discussed at my website at sunshine-parenting.com and search for episode 106. If you're interested in getting even more resources about raising thriving kids, I invite you to join my weekly email list. You can find the link to subscribe on my website. If you enjoy the Sunshine Parenting Podcast, I would really appreciate you sharing this episode with a friend or taking a moment to write a rating and review in iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'll end this episode with some of Nefertiti's words from her book, Motherhood So White. Hopefully, sharing my journey to adoption and how I learned to become a single mother on my own terms will accomplish two goals: encourage more women to choose how to curate a family, and begin to bridge the racial divide that currently encapsulates motherhood. For my Black sisters who are auntie mommies or cousin mommies, thank you for providing crucial support for children in your family or neighborhood. And for those without children, adopting a child you do not know is not a sin and not just for rich or white people. It is a gift, and only you know if you are ready to take the plunge. This is your life, your money, and your time. Do what feels right to you and block out the cultural noise and expectations of how a single Black woman becomes a mother. For my white sisters, Black mothers have a lot of child-rearing experience and plenty to say about the state of preschool, family leave, healthcare, nutrition, bullying, video games, and our socioeconomically segregated school system. If we coalesced around even one of these issues, it would ease the emotional and financial burden of parenting we all experience. Also, be aware of your privilege and seek to build community with all mothers, regardless of race, religion, or socioeconomics. This is one way we can become true allies for diversity and inclusivity, while simultaneously respecting and acknowledging our unique perspectives.
This podcast is a proud member of Parents on Demand, a network of high-quality shows for families just like yours. Download our free network app on Apple and Android and listen to your favorite episodes on the go.